We're good.
Hi, I'm Kef. I'm the facilitator for today's session. I'm going to introduce Sam, who's going to be our speaker for this session. So, Sam currently works at USC football and previously worked at Camden Military Academy, and she's going to take it away with her story right about now.
Hi guys, I hope you've had a good weekend and March so far. So I guess I'll just kind of jump right into it. So luckily, I have never had like a full mental health crisis where I've been worried about the athlete or one of my patients kind of harming themselves or others. So I am kind of thankful for that. But in terms of a mental health scenario, I do have a pretty big one that I dealt with at Camden Military last year. Again, luckily, I've been thankful enough. We haven't had anything in terms of a mental health crisis where we had to activate any EAPs or anything at football. So that's good. But there was this one incident when I was at Camden that kind of stretched throughout my entire time there. So just to give you guys some background, about a month and a half into working at Camden, there was a really big lawsuit going around about one of the cross country coaches. Um, and it basically came out that he was having inappropriate relationships with the students there. So, in general, dealing with that was a pretty big deal, especially because, again, it was a cross country coach and a teacher. He was also pretty high up in terms of like admin. So, having to navigate that with the nurses was definitely a learning curve, but going more in depth in terms of like the exact scenario I'm talking about, it was an ex cross country athlete. It was a couple months later now, so we're talking like late November, and it's basketball season. We're in the gym. Everyone's kind of cleaning up. I would usually just kind of wait to make sure all the athletes are done before I like physically lock the gym, because at Camden, all the buildings are kind of separate because it's a boarding school. So the gym is like its own isolated building. So I always had to lock it, make sure like none of the athletes were just fooling around in there. So he's kind of taking a while to kind of pack everything up. And this athlete in general, like his temperament, he's like very outgoing, very bubbly. And like I did notice throughout the day that he was just in more of a bit of a mood. So I was like, okay, like trying to see. But he's also a teenage boy, so they get in moods all the time, especially at Camden. So we're about to pack up, and I can tell he's just off. And I'm like, hey, are you okay? Then he just kind of starts going off about this incident he's dealing with his friend at home, and his friend's kind of making large claims and basically said that he was gonna like harm himself because of the situation he was dealing with to my and again my athlete is in South Carolina, nowhere near them and can't really do anything. So he's kind of freaking out. So I have to like, kind of calm him down through that situation. And for me it was kind of a lot because one, like dealing with minors, it's definitely different than I feel like more of an adult population. I have to remember their kids. And not only are they like susceptible to what you say, but again, you're not really their mom either. But at a boarding school, like I had more of like author what is it, how do I say this? Like authoritarian role. Like I was more like kind of had to discipline them and kind of like teach them certain things and life lessons. So I'm kind of just trying to calm him down and get him out of a bad mindset. But then the friend stops answering him, so he kind of starts to spiral. And at Camden, they need to know about like every single one of their whereabouts. So I get coaches starting to text me, being like, "Where's so and so? Where's so and so?" And I'm like, "It's okay. Like we're just kind of dealing with a small situation in the gym right now because this athlete's upset, crying." And again, it's really sad, but Camden doesn't have necessarily the best um, role models when it comes to like speaking and teaching about men's mental health. Like I hear a lot of the teachers and coaches say like mental health isn't real, it's not a thing, like stuff like that. So it's like very hard to just I feel like I can't just necessarily send him off to someone right now because he was in such a vulnerable state. So it was kind of difficult for me dealing with like the my coworkers and my AD being like wanting to rush his kid back to his dorm, but at the same time I'm like, no, like the athlete comes first and his safety, and like I wasn't necessarily that comfortable. So that was honestly one of the biggest kind of mental health crises and navigating that again, especially with a minor, because I felt like there's a lot of stuff that's different when you deal with adolescents than the adults, meaning like parents and everything. So like that night I did end up calling his family and letting him know what happened. Because again, like when I leave Camden, like it's not like I have contact to these kids or anything. Obviously, God forbid anything happens, like the nurses are there. Um, but yeah, so any questions? I hope I explained that decently.
Did you ever kind of figure out what had happened with like the person that your student athlete was like worried about?
Yeah, so it did drag on like a day and a half. Again, they were making these really large claims. Obviously, my athlete started freaking out about it. I ended up calming him down. At that point, the friend just completely stopped answering for like 24 hours. And it turns out they got into it with like their family member. They took his phone, it was a whole thing. But again, from my athlete's point of view, like that's terrifying. Like your friend's making these like bold claims, and then all of a sudden you can't hear from them. And again, at Camden, like they only have so much access to their phones in general. So it was like sad seeing my athlete like really beat up about that and like again like just really not being able to do anything other than wait and see. So that again that was really hard to kind of have a backseat, but I think he handled it as best as he could have. Obviously freaking out was I think anyone's natural and like innate response to that.
Do you think the stigma of mental health like played a lot into his reaction, or like was there a reason you felt like he was more comfortable like with you rather than like the coaches that might have known him longer or anything like that?
Yeah, I think it is pretty the stigma at Camden is pretty bad. Like even I hear coaches and teachers make comments and stuff and like I try and correct it in front of them so the athletes could kind of like be aware that like oh maybe like try to question it. But there is a lot of kind of toxic verbiage that they use at Camden that like I try to like reverse, especially in my training room. Like I would never let the coaches say things that I didn't necessarily agree on in front of them and in front of me. But yeah, like it's sad, but especially some of the people at Camden who've been there for like 30, 40 years, like it's just such a what's the word I'm looking for? Like there's like a word in Spanish. It's called like machismo, but like toxic male masculinity, I guess, would be kind of the way to describe that. And it's hard because especially being there for a year, you can't necessarily always change everything, but at the same time, like they're impressionable boys, and it was like hard to see, and I didn't ever agree with that.
So I know you had said that this kind of spanned throughout your time at Camden, and this specific instance was in the fall, I believe. So did this like continue on with this athlete, or was it like a one-time occurrence?
It was actually a one-time occurrence. Believe it or not, again, because Camden's very weird. Because it's a boarding school. After they got sent home for the month-long like winter break they have, I actually never saw him again. So yeah, again, it sucks, and they're minors, so it's not like I could even really continue care in that way. You know, it's not like that's just not appropriate, but it does suck in terms of like instances like that because it's like I feel like I did kind of help him navigate some. 'Cause he was also a bit older. He wasn't like 12, one of the 12-year-olds at Camden. Like he, would able to rationalize um certain events and stuff. And yeah, it was sad. Like we handled that fine. I think it was maybe a week and a half until they left. He was good throughout that entire time, and then he ended up not coming back. So.
I have two kind of questions for you. One,
Mhm.
learning what we've learned so far in this class, would you do anything differently then?
Mhm.
Is the first one. I'll ask the second one after.
Mhm. Honestly, yeah, I think I probably could have been better at teaching him like specific like, breathing techniques and coaching and stuff like that. I think at the time I did use like some techniques, like the just normal like deep breaths and abdominal breathing. Oh no, sorry, diaphragmatic breathing. And just like the very basic, like let's count down to 10 and continue to do that and like control your breathing. But yeah, I think I definitely could have benefited from knowing more of those techniques. I just think my undergrad didn't really focus in terms of that. Like I didn't wasn't really that aware, so that's definitely something that I would take into practice. But what was your second question?
The second one was since you don't have that same type of continuous care because of the setting, how does that change any of like the interactions? No, especially knowing there's a toxic masculinity culture at the institution.
Yeah. Honestly, once I started to kind of catch wind of that and see it, and this was one of the instances where it did come out, because again, like, in terms of the adult side of it, like they weren't really like I don't want to say respecting me. I've always was respected at Camden, but like they weren't necessarily listening to what I was saying. And I'm like I didn't want to raise too many alarms and be like activate the EAP or anything like that. But at the same time, I'm like no, like let's take a second. Like I got him, I can handle him. Like he's safe. Blah blah blah. So again, after that incident and finding out about the things they would say, and kids, like they come in the room and tell me things. Like, yeah, sometimes I'd have to fish out some lies, but at the same time, like I would hear again the like toxic verbiage. And I just try to always preach to them that like your mental health does matter. And when they would say like certain verbiage that not as alarming, but isn't necessarily like conducive to say long term, like I try to like correct them throughout that time. And like again, working there did like kind of changed the way I'd have to approach athletic training because again, like they don't have a lot of role models. So I felt the need, to teach them that their mental health does matter and that there's resources for them and long term, like again, their mental health matters and that it's okay to feel your emotions, etc. Stuff like that. So it was definitely a big learning curve for me in terms of not taking that role, but also understanding what it means to work in at like a high school, middle school population and what that means.
One of the differences you touched on a little bit was just like at Camden, when you go home for the day, like you don't have contact with the kids versus at our current clinical sites, I'd say both of us are probably pretty accessible like all the time. Do you feel like that makes dealing with these concerns easier or harder? Like, is there a preference you have, like leave work at work or be available 24/7? Like for this situation, do you think it would have changed if they could have contacted you more frequently outside of work hours?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Honestly, I think there's pros and cons to both. I think sometimes I don't like being so accessible. Like sometimes I'd rather just kind of try my phone. But in terms of like mental health, it's just boring. You know what I mean? And like be able to just check up on him. I mean, even if it's just something as quick as like you doing all right. Like I just feel like even just a quick checkup can one not only tell you about like them as a person, how they handle situations long term, but also like again, I don't know. Like I feel like I do sometimes take that stuff home where it's like I do get a bit anxious about like what they're doing when I'm not able to really be there. And especially like just the added layer of them not being able to like contact their own parents sometimes or see their parents like and siblings, extended family, like seeing how that weighed, I guess, on the athletes and students, like did make me, I think, want to like be able to be in contact with them a bit more. And again, seeing how some stuff that I was concerned about or I wanted to deal with a bit more was just like swept under the rug and like the guys would like they would the teachers or whatever would tell them like to not come to the training room like no you don't need to see Sam and like if they were told no like they physically could not come see me. So it's like stuff like that. Yeah. So it's like stuff like that, like they be being called like dramatic and blah 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 when like I want to check up on them for like X amount of reasons. Like that part I definitely wish that I was able to have more like autonomy and like be able to contact them. But obviously giving restraints, you just gotta work with the boundaries that are set where you are.
Knowing what you know now and having lived the experiences you lived at Camden, what do you think a really good mental health like policy or even procedure do you think would be most beneficial to implement?
Good question. I think I need like a second to think on that. I think, and just using Camden because I've been using this as an example, like a school like that that doesn't necessarily have a lot of mental health resources in general, I think it would just be more important to like really solidify like a plan in terms of um if like a crisis has happened. Like we had an EAP like specific to a mental health crisis, but I think just having more resources, like the only resource they really had and that I had like listed in the AP and everything was the chaplain there. But at the same time, like I don't necessarily think that's always enough, and like he could only do so much as well. He wasn't technically licensed in like um a mental health like specific field or anything either. So it's like again, like in my opinion, he could only really do so much. So I think just if I were a bit more long term and could establish like a better rapport and be able to collect more resources, I think that's probably the biggest one that I would have done is actually like find a more stable resource for the kids to kind of go to and like share their emotions. And I think like a non-biased one too, I think would be good, meaning like that doesn't technically work for the school, that isn't technically attached to like a religion. And I'm not saying like the religion has anything to do on it, but I don't know. Not every kid is one necessarily Catholic or Christian at that university, and two, like I don't know. I just think in terms of mental health, like especially at an adolescent age, like there's having the one person you go to be attached to a religion, I think could also maybe cause a negative connotation to some kids. So I think there's definitely multiple layers at Camden, but that's kind of how I think I would start to try and help and build something there for them.
Did you find that since the only kind of quote unquote like mental health provider was the chaplain, like were there any like kind of religious roadblocks that like stopped people from maybe talking to the chaplain?
Yeah, I mean, again, I know just from being around them and talking to them, it like off the top of my head, I know at minimum like 10 were Muslim because they practiced or participated in Ramadan and stuff, so I've talked to them about that. But I didn't necessarily hear it directly from the kids, but I can only like kind of assume like for like I just feel like again, the only person you have to talk to about your mental health or being homesick and stuff is a religion that you didn't grow up in or that you don't necessarily believe in or practice. Like I can imagine how that would, you know what I mean, create some barriers for them. Again, I never heard it directly, but for me personally, I can only kind of assume, especially being at such a lead. I think that I don't know that's beneficial. The school itself isn't attached to a religion. It's not like it's like a Christian boarding school. So that's like one thing that I kind of was always a bit iffy about. Like, and great guy, he did great work with them, but again, at the same time, I just feel like that's not really inclusive healthcare, in my opinion.
I do have one more question.
Mhm.
Kind of like a, I don't know that there's a right answer to this
Yeah.
question, but so in the scenario that, you know, the person that your student athlete was worried about, like, needed like a genuine like wellness check, but it's across state lines and it's a minor, like, did you have like a game plan in your head of like, oh, like if he really says something that is, you know, like he's going to take an action against himself, like what you would do in that scenario?
I mean, honestly, the only thing that I was thinking of, because again, like, I don't necessarily think my athlete in that moment was of harm to himself or others, then obviously I would have activated an EAP. But yeah, like you said, like obviously was concerned, and that's why I like took the time to sit there and stay with him. Um, but I mean, I had the kids like first and last name just throughout, um, my athlete telling me the story and everything. And like my only plan and the only thing I think that I really could have done in that moment is when I was talking to the athlete's parents, kind of drop first and last name, see if, they're family friends or anything. But honestly, I couldn't really think of anything else in the moment that I really could have or would have done because obviously it's like not in our scope at all. Like I can't go contacting a random kid somewhere that I don't really know, but it was definitely sad and in terms of like that and not knowing like I don't know. I get too, I think, attached to certain situations. So like it did bother me not being able to one, see that athlete ever again and two, like even hear about what came out of that story. Cause obviously like I would hope that nothing good came out, but just being left kind of on a cliff, I was like, well, just kind of hoping and wishing for the best for them. Again, found out he was physically safe and everything, but at the same time, not being able to see any of that through, I think was a bit difficult.
How do you think that experience, or even just being at Camden, has kind of shaped your experience or your outlook going into football?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely shaped me differently in terms of an athletic trainer. Like I thought I was going in to learn autonomy and like how to work by myself and decision making and like I really did come out of it learning a lot. Um, Nothing I really thought I was. I think my time, if I do reflect and think about it, I feel like I did get more empathetic throughout. And I'm not saying I wasn't empathetic going into it, but I really do think that they're them being just like so impressionable and like me, I had like a huge aha moment like a month in being like, oh my gosh, like not even to sound corny, but like what I say or my actions like genuinely will like mold some of these people. Like there's gonna be one or two conversations to have that they're gonna think about. So it's like I think kind of one realizing that we are also like I don't know, teachers in a way to like our athletes was a big realization. And then yeah, like I said, like my empathy for sure and like going to UC football, like I definitely wanted to take everything I learned and all the attributes that I learned like to my site. Again, it's very different, especially who my patient population is. Like I don't necessarily get all the same like no one's crying to me saying they miss their mom, obviously, but it's like I think there's definitely bits and pieces of that that I've seen even at this like level, and even them being like men, I don't really think has much else to do with it. You know what I mean? Like I've seen them at vulnerable moments, like having season-ending injuries and being left in a room with them and not really knowing them, like having to even combat that. I think I did take again bits and pieces from Camden, so.
You mentioned like the factor that, with at Camden you worked with all men and at football also all men.
Mhm.
Was that like an intentional clinical choice on your part, or do you think like male versus female like mental health is kind of obviously it's different, but do you want to talk me through like what you think those differences are maybe, or like different ways you maybe handle those situations for different male or female?
Yeah, sorry. Can you guys hear me? I think my phone lagged a little.
I can hear you.
Okay, okay, okay. Um, no, that definitely was not intentional. Actually coming into this said I would never work at a high school. So being placed at Camden in general was a bit like of a shock. And then after finding out it was all boys, I was like, oh. And then I am passionate about football, so that I guess is intentional. But I think women's and men's mental health is definitely different. I mean, even something as basic as like a women's period, like, that's very hormonal, like that can change like a woman's mental state sometimes. And like, I don't know, there's definitely a lot of different factors on each, but and in my undergrad, I had experience working two women's sports and I dealt with a pretty big like mental health personal situation there because I was a senior at the site at the time and my preceptor was a male and it was women's rugby and the situation she did not feel comfortable at all talking to that athletic trainer at the time. He was also brand new. So it's like they didn't have any type of rapport. And I did learn a lot in that experience because I was kind of the bridge between obviously the full time athletic trainer and then also our mental health specialist and the nutritionist. So it was like nice, obviously not the situation, but nice to kind of like learn and like be able to bridge that gap. Because again, obviously the head athletic trainer had to be involved in her care, but at the same time, like she didn't necessarily like want him in the room for certain things and stuff like that. So I think being able to have that and see like a women's mental health situation is definitely different than football. And I mean, football in general is, I think, its own beast in terms of mental health as well. Like we're lucky at USC to have so many resources and journal and everything like that, and people at um on the football staff that they feel comfortable going with. But I don't know. I think everywhere you work and every site and male versus female is gonna kind of produce a different outlook and environment on mental health for sure. But sometimes I do miss working women's sport. It's just different. I feel like it's woman to woman, you have a tiny bit of a different like relationship there. Sometimes I think it might be easier to talk about mental health with like a woman on woman versus like me versus one of the athletes. So like football athletes.
I have one question kind of
Mm,
piggybacking off of Kef. How much has the male mental health stigma affected your clinical experience, having only been or having only worked with men?
yeah. I think it really comes down to who's also like backing what you say, whether that's like coaches at football, other athletic trainers with me, um, the nurse staff at Camden. Like I think if everyone's kind of preaching the same thing and encouraging these men to, be open about mental health and things like that. I think in that situation it works, but I think when you have too many cooks in the kitchen saying too many different things that all contradict each other, and again, I think that male stigma is definitely still around today. Like mental health in general is a new conversation. I feel like that wasn't even a thing 20, 30 years ago. And it's great, obviously, that it's come to the forefront. But I think in terms of like the male masculinity, like toxic side of it, I think it's definitely still pretty heavy on the forefront. And it's sad. But it's like again, like I can preach my soapbox on mental health and why it's so important, but when the people that they really listen to and look up to are saying otherwise, I think that sadly, but my message might get lost there again, especially when you think about a site like USC football and how many meetings they have a day and X, Y, and Z. I think like it's just hard. I think it'll get better with time for sure. Did that answer your question?
I think I don't have any more questions. Nicole, I don't know if you have any more, but if not, I don't know if you have any just like kind of final thoughts, wrap up type things, maybe like one, takeaway from this situation, Sam.
I think my biggest takeaway is just again to kind of continue to preach on mental health, especially if I do stay in like a male dominated sport, but also I think to wherever I go next, I plan personally to like stay there a bit. So I think definitely I would look into the resources for sure in terms of like what that site has, because up in the air right now, but I could end up at like a smaller D2 or even a smaller D1 and somewhere that doesn't have like all the mega resources that USC has. So I think like again, wherever I go to next, I think just starting to streamline that process and get that moving is definitely something that I'm pretty passionate about and something I've taken away from working at a tiny little high school in South Carolina. So but yeah.
Good. Well, that's I feel like that's great to hear that you had some, some clinical and personal takeaways from this scenario and that Camden kind of shaped you as an athletic trainer moving forward with your experience with
Mhm.
football and then kind of wherever life takes you next. I know mental health scenarios are things that we generally take with us wherever we go. So feels like this one had a lasting impact on you and changed your clinical practice, hopefully for the better. So
Yeah, for sure.
all good things and thank you for your honesty and sharing. Nicole, I don't know if you have any final thoughts. If not, I think we're right around our 30-minute mark here, so we could probably just wrap up. So I will toss it over to Nicole for any final confirmation of if we are done or not.
We're pretty much at the 30-minute mark, so Yeah, thank you, Sam, for being open and for being vulnerable and sharing that, and also all of the additional 2 cents and opinions on it. I think it really helps to paint the full picture and see what
Mhm.
you show us what you've taken away. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys for listening.
All right, and with that, I am gonna end the recording.